What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia stock, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Friday, April 5th. Okay, guys, Nvidia taking kind of a dive along with a lot of the market here in the afternoon today, finishing the day down $30.64 a share. That's minus 3.44%. Listen, Nvidia being such a mega cap blue chip stock, couple of things here going on in the macro just to be aware of. Tomorrow morning, 1 hour before the market opens, we get the jobs report. Of course, we're seeing some volatility affect Nvidia here in the last third of today with that coming up. In addition to that, we also had quite a few Fed speakers today. You know, we're getting comments like, quote, smart for the Fed to take our time. No one wants inflation to reemerge. Kashkari going as far as saying, hey, if inflation continues to go sideways, that makes me question whether we're going to need to do cuts at all this year. This is nothing we haven't heard before, but these kind of comments always contribute to some added volatility, and Nvidia, being the mega cap that it is, it's going to be impacted by that. But let's take a look here. Let's pull out all the bias we possibly can get that the market's giving us today, take a look at the options directional bias near the end, and finally, the expected move. But let's start by analyzing the volume profile here on the 5-minute chart to see what kind of bias we can pull out. Listen, by the way, today is the first day of the newly implemented upload schedule. The Nvidia video is going to hit every single day that the market is open at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time sharp. So listen, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the channel. My goal is to hit 6,000 in the next couple of days here. I appreciate it. Let's take a look. So a couple of moves that I want to take a look at here. I want to take a look at this drop that we got off the open. And then obviously I want to take a look at this big fade that Nvidia was a part of there later in the day, really like the last third of today. Let's take a look. Now listen, on this drop, you know, bears, I wish I had a little bit better news for you, but the truth is there is no bias here at all. We got a very contextual fade off the open. That looks incredibly normal to me. There's no bias to be had there. However, you know, as kind of expected, but actually not to a ridiculous degree based on the actual price action, we saw an increase in volume a little bit prematurely here in, you know, typically we expect this fade upside in volume to occur later in the day, closer to the close, more in like that last half hour of the trading day. That took place a little bit earlier with these consecutive red candles, so, you know, that gets broken up by a few green bars, but that certainly is a slight bearish bias. But listen, it's not ridiculously overwhelming. Like a really obvious bearish bias would be, you know, 3, 4, or more consecutive red bars with 800,000, a million shares apiece. You know, maybe even just 600,000 apiece, 3 or 4 consecutive bars. We're not seeing that. We got, you know, a pop or two here. Yeah, that's not, you know, we're not talking 3, 4 consecutive bars. But into the close, we of course got a little bit of a higher volume bar. This bar here, guys, we talk about this a lot. This is that first bar after the bell. This candle very rarely contributes to a lot of volatility. And we, you know, I say this whether it's green or red, by the way, this bar is almost always there. And as of late, my expectation with a high level of certainty is that that is algorithmic rebalancing going on that triggers at the bell for funds and institutions. So I'm not worried about this candle here, but we are seeing just a slight bit of bearish bias to support that downside move. But given the nature of the downside move, you know, truthfully, it's not quite as much as I would have expected. Now, let's get started here on the psychological, there we go, self-fulfilling prophecy levels that I'm paying close attention to here on the 30-minute chart. Guys, the truth is here today, remember yesterday in the video, we had just broken beneath that 50-period moving average, and it was going to be a battle here today. Well, we reclaimed it overnight, right? And then this morning we tested it and held on that fade that we got off the open, but we really didn't get that big high volume bounce because 900 was in the way. We talked about that a lot. We rejected off 9. This started to get a little mushy, and then finally the late day market volatility pushed us through, and we now find ourselves a good bit away from that level. It's about 4% away from that 50 period here on the 30-minute chart. So, you know, bears, you guys put some distance in between. That was a good thing to see if you are a bear. That's the truth. But, I mean, listen, bulls, today was a 3.5% day. So 4%, especially considering the fact that that 50 period will likely fade downside tomorrow based on the volume here late in the day and close that gap even a little bit tighter than 4%, right? That is likely to be a little bit smaller. Listen, my number one concern here on this 30-minute chart in particular is bulls. Let's try to reclaim those moving averages, as quickly as we can. You see that we tested this 200 period off the open and got rejected hard. Held the 50 for a period of time. It eventually just got mushy and broke. That macro volatility is to thank for that. But I do expect very much so this 50 period to fade downside and make that reclaim within a little bit more reason, within a smaller needed move tomorrow, okay? But we do currently find ourselves, a little bit further away than that than we've seen in a little while. So, getting closer to that level for an eventual reclaim of both of these is really ideal. Honestly, and for me, whether that's these coming down to meet the stock or the stock bouncing to meet them, in the short term, I really don't mind, as long as we can set up for a reclaim at some point in the near future. And by the way, this is the 30-minute. These moving averages change quickly on the 30-minute. That's especially true for the 50 period. All right. Now let's move on here to the 4-hour chart and take a look. We're going to talk about these macro levels once we get to the daily, but really quickly, let's just quickly touch on what is specific to the 4-hour. That 50 period, guys, was very much so in play last night. We were about, 2.6, 2.7% away. We now find ourselves, a good bit from that level, 6.5% from that 50 period on the 4-hour. We're only about 3% to the downside away from that 200 period. That's still a relatively wide channel, but we've seen some crazy volatility out of Nvidia in the last year or so. Listen, my primary concerns from both perspectives here on the 4-hour, if you're a bull, I really wouldn't want to see that 50 period start fading beneath 9. We need to leave that 9 as, I don't want to use the word weak, but I will because it's easier to explain it that way. I want that $900 level to be as weak as it possibly can be, and that 50 period on the 4-hour getting beneath it strengthens that level as a potential resistance. All right, now if you're a bear, that 200 period is a similar situation with 850. You guys want that to stay beneath. You don't need 850 to be any stronger than it already is as a potential support level. Okay, now let's move on to the daily. This is going to tell us the real story here. The real macro story with tons of eyeballs. What's the psychology on this chart? Listen, guys, as of late, the story has been $900 a share. Today has changed that a little bit. Okay? In the near future, the biggest level that's within reasonable distance is still $900, but tomorrow, we're now closer to 850. Listen, guys, tomorrow, in my eyes, is the battle of 850, considering the momentum that the Bears were able to pull off into the close today. Bulls, priority number one, do not give up 850. Okay? If we see a test, which is certainly not out of the question, if we see a test of 850, and it's not to the penny, it's more like a little bit of a range around 850, I just want to see, I don't care what volume it tests on, as long as it bounces hard away from that level on big volume. I need a big sample size agreeing that the bounce is what's going to occur. Bears. Okay, a downside crack of 850 is slightly more complicated. Ideally, if I were bearish here, I would be looking for a high volume snap just to get down through 850. But then, I need confirmation because that's been a relatively strong level of support in the last couple of weeks here. I would want to see a high volume break, low volume, low amount of bets being placed, right? Retest, and then boom, high volume confirmation, high volume break downside after the low volume retest, which comes after the low volume break. Now, two more things we need to talk about here. We have an expiration tomorrow, okay? So at the close tomorrow, Friday, the market's expectation is that Nvidia moves plus or minus $20.29 a share. So by close tomorrow, the volatility expectation, right, which by design does not have a directional bias, the volatility expectation here is that by close on Friday, Nvidia is somewhere around 879-ish or as low as like 839. Okay, so the market expects, it doesn't necessarily expect to break upside above 9 tomorrow, but it potentially expects a break downside of 850. That's the volatility expectation. Now, how do we get a directional bias? We get that out of one, the volume profile, in no particular order, by the way, the volume profile, the psychological analysis, the areas of interest among traders, and one more thing, the options bias. 1.45 million total contracts traded today. 887,000 of those were calls. 564,000 of those were puts. So we're seeing a call side bias. Delta ranges, the short-term bets being placed, those short-term speculators, the 0 to 20 delta range, those are the far out of the money on average, shortest term expiration contracts traded today. In that range, we're seeing 382,000 calls and about 204,000 puts. So again, a call side bias out of the short-term speculators as well as the overall. Listen, if you guys got value out of that video, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Nvidia hits every single trading day at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time sharp. And listen, if your goal is to try to expedite this process of going either part-time or maybe even full-time as a trader, take a look at the Roensch Capital Gold server. That link in the pinned comment will allow you to get grandfathered in at the current rate. Hope to see you join for tomorrow's trading day, and I'll see you in the next one.